Hello, everyone. Welcome for this webinar on the National Climate League standing launch. We will be starting off today to hear about the National Climate League standings results, as well as hear from some citizens that have been involved with the National Climate League this year and will share with us their journey. So before starting, I want to mention that this webinar is available in French. Donc, pour tous ceux qui se joignent à nous aujourd'hui, bonjour. Le webinaire va se dérouler en anglais avec une traduction disponible en français. Vous pouvez donc, dans la barre du Zoom en bas de votre écran, cliquer sur l'icône de la planète avec écrit traduction ou interprétation et vous pouvez choisir durant le webinaire la langue que vous préférez. So during this webinar, we have French translation. On the Zoom bar at the bottom of your screen, there is an icon of a planet with an interpretation, so you can switch between French and English during this webinar. So I will switch back to English and get started. My name is Margot Burgues-Paulet. I am the National Campaign Manager at the Climate Reality Project Canada, as well as the lead commissioner of the National Climate League, and I will be the host of this webinar for today. During this introductory word, I would invite everyone to answer a poll. We're going to put up a quick poll right now to just hear where you're joining from and what's bringing you here today. So are you a volunteer or a partner of the NCL? Do you already know the NCL and you've seen the previous standings? Or maybe this is actually your first time hearing about it, in which case we're very excited to have you. So we'll just wait a few seconds for the poll results to come in while everybody keeps joining, and don't forget to use the chat to introduce yourself as well if you wish. Perfect. I think we can, it's 12:03. Maybe we can see the poll results if we have enough displayed. Okay, we have 17% that are volunteers, 28% who know the NCL, and we actually have 55% of people that are here for the first time. Great. Without further ado, I will pass on to the next slide, please, to go to the agenda to cover what we'll do today. We will first have welcome and land acknowledgement from our Executive Director, Andréane Parent. We'll do an introduction of what the National Climate League is, as well as a presentation of the NCL results. So the winners in all of the different indicators. I'll follow with a presentation of NCL key takeaways, and we will have case studies from citizens from Montreal as well as Oakville. So we will welcome Matthew Chapman from the Montreal Climate Hub and Ron McKee from the Oakville Climate Hub. And I will end this presentation with the little sneak peek at the NCL dashboard. Without further ado, I will pass the mic to Andréane Parent.
Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you to our launch webinar for the National Climate League. You are joining us today virtually from everywhere in Canada. I'm joining from Jodagé, commonly known as Montreal, where the Climate Reality Project Canada offices are located. The land from which I'm speaking today has long served and continues to serve as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous people, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. The Climate Reality Project Canada honors, recognizes, and respects these nations as the traditional stewards of the land and waters on which we are today, and we are very grateful for their hospitality, allowing us to meet in good condition to have this exciting discussion. For the fourth year in a row, we are thrilled to release the National Climate League standings. The standings were one of the 2022 Clean 50 Top Projects honorees, which is a fantastic honor and acknowledgement of the thousands of hours volunteers, climate advocates from all across Canada have invested in measuring what matters, using cities as key pathways for climate policy solution, and to demand accountabilities from their municipalities. This launch is also an opportunity to thank them for their dedicated work. With the National Climate League, you become local heroes fighting crime with data. Indeed, citizen-led, data-driven, and centered on inspiring solutions, the National Climate League function as both a benchmarking and lobbying tool. Let's see how you can use it to compare our Canadian municipalities fair across sustainability indicators. Back to you, Margot.
Thank you, Andréane. So without further ado, I'll do a quick introduction of what the National Climate League is. The National Climate League is about putting citizens at the center of the action. It was developed in 2018, as Andréane said. It's an exercise in participative democracy, really highlighting local solutions that help improve the lives of everyday Canadians and set Canadian municipalities on a path to carbon neutrality by 2050. Basically, to quantify positive impact and measure what matters, we track progress on primary and complementary indicators across municipalities in Canada. So we chose these indicators based on 5 criteria: accessibility, comparability across cities, ability of municipal government to act on these indicators, their impact on greenhouse gases emission, and finally, whether average citizens care about that particular indicator improving. There could be many indicators, but we had to make some decisions, and we've stuck with those 31 for this year. Next slide, please. So a little bit now on the timeline of that project so that you're a little bit aware of how it went on from 2021 to 2022. So in spring last year, we started doing the preparation and workshop. That means indicator refinement and establishing the league, which means all the volunteers that will be dedicated to the project. In summer, we start data collection and research. So that means we launch our data collection season, we call it. We do policy research. We invite citizens to reach out to their municipalities to ask for the data. So really clarifying what the indicators are. And our end, we provide them with talking points and templates that they can use in order to do so and to give them the tools that they need. In the fall, we do data consolidation. So that means identifying missing data sometimes, looking online for data as well. And finally, in winter, we arrive at the writing and launch plan. So we have also volunteers involved with writing the NCL. We do graphic design as well as translation because the document is available in both French and English. And today is the official launch where you can find the link to download our standings on our website. Next slide, please. I'll now look over a few key numbers about the NCL 2021. We actually had 66 municipalities from all across Canada, meaning we actually have all the provinces identified in the report this year, as well as municipalities of all sizes. So we go from the smaller municipality, which is actually Thames Centre with 10,000 or so inhabitants, all the way to the Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver of bigger size. We had a total of 551 data points gathered and more than 50 volunteers. So once again, with the next slide, I want to take a second to say the biggest thank you to everyone that was involved. If we could just go to the next slide, please. So that represents a lot of people, and I really do want it to be a testament of how important it is to have people involved in caring about issues at the local level. That means improving data transparency. That means increasing, raising literacy of what sustainability could be in cities. So just a huge thank you to all of you, because I know that some of you are connected with us today. Now, what to expect in the National Climate League 2021? We have a few sections that I'll highlight now, and I'll invite you to read the report to know more. First, we have a section called A Climate Year in Review. And I want to identify the fact that Environment Canada wrote in their summary of the 2021 year result, and I quote, "Not in 26 years has there been anything comparable to this year, where Canadians endured such a stream of weather events. At times in 2021, Canada even broke records for the number of records broken." So when we talk about climate change, we know it's important to face the fact that it's happening right now, very close to us. And so that's why we wanted to dedicate a section on this. We also have a section on international highlights, and that means that for all of the indicators that I will present after, we also identify municipalities across the world that have implemented policy in order to improve a certain indicator. So that can serve as inspiration that our municipalities here can use in order to improve on the indicators. The third element is a new feature on data accessibility and availability. We wanted to have a highlight of providing increased transparency and how the data was collected, how sometimes it's not that easy to collect the data, what are the data sources that we've used. So we've detailed them for every indicator. And finally, we have a new justice theme with 3 new indicators. The NCL is obviously about climate and sustainability, but it's not only about greenhouse gases reduction or quality of life. We wanted to bring a climate justice lens, and we wanted to stress in this edition how important it is to have communities that inspire where no one is left behind. So next, I want to do another quick poll with all our participants today. Before I announce the results, I want to hear what indicators you're the most looking forward to hearing about. We have in the choices bike lanes, public transit, waste, air quality, or urban greenness. And as I mentioned, there's 16 indicators, so many more. But for this poll, I made the personal choice to only put 5. I'll give a moment for everyone to vote. And I love that everybody is introducing themselves in the chat. Thank you so much. It makes it much more interactive for me as the presenter today. And maybe we can have the results of the poll now. Okay, pretty split. A lot of interest in urban greenness with 30%. The next, public transit with 25%, and pretty even distribution between air quality, waste, and bike lanes. Okay. Well, now I can share the results. So I have a map coming up in the slide. Here we go. Just for simplicity, I will actually go from west to east. So kind of just sharing which cities have won which indicator. In Victoria, we have has one EV charging station. Then we have North Vancouver that won 3, the sustainable building, sustainable jobs, and urban agriculture. Vancouver was the winner for walkability, shared vehicle, and employees dedicated to the transition. We also had Kelowna and BC winning bike lane this year. In terms of air quality, we have Whitehorse, Yellowknife, Prince Albert, as well as Brandon, all winning on these. In terms of Manitoba, we have Steinbach that is winning affordable housing. Toronto in Ontario is winning gender equality. Ottawa is winning air quality. Montreal is winning public transit and energy mix. Charlottetown is also winning air quality, and we have St. John's winning on urban greenness. The reason why we have many indicators winning air quality is because our indicator this year was the number of days with a good quality air quality in terms of the AQI, the air quality index, and all those cities scored with 365 days of good air quality. I'll dive in a few seconds more into some of the takeaways of the NCL. So kind of big picture trends that we've identified. Next slide, please. In terms of the complementary indicator, these tend to be more binary of whether a city has them or not. So the data collection is a little more simplified. We actually collected data in Calgary, Charlottetown, Langford, North Vancouver, Saskatoon, St. John, and Oakville. I will not go through these results in this webinar, but I absolutely invite you to go read the standings themselves. Next section, please. So now comes the moment where I'm going to talk about some key takeaways and share some sneak peeks of the visualization that we have worked from this year. So first, in the next slide, we'll have the general highlights that we have identified for the municipal level across Canada first, an increase in representation of historically marginalized groups, such as BIPOC, women, and non-binary candidates during recent elections. So we're talking about municipal elections in Alberta, Quebec, Newfoundland, Labrador, and the Yukon. We also wanted to highlight the fact that, and that's not a surprise for a lot of us that work in that sector, but still is important to acknowledge, Canadians are increasingly worrying about climate change and its effect, with 52% of respondents that reported being extremely or quite concerned about climate change, with British Columbians being the most concerned. And that study was done last summer, so when the wildfires were happening. Next section, please. The third big highlight and takeaway that we have is a big shift in transportation habits. That includes significant bike store. So municipalities have increasingly been responding positively to the creation of bike lanes. That also is done with no surprise to the pandemic. The data that we have is for the year 2021. So as people are starting to live with the new reality of the pandemic, and that also applies to public transit, that took the expected big hit that it was going to take for multiple reasons that I'll get into a little bit later. And the third shift that we've identified is in shared vehicle number that have increased. I'll dive a little bit deeper in the bike indicator now. With the next slide, please. Yes, perfect. So we have identified Kelowna bike lanes, and actually Kelowna had a total of 246 kilometers of bike lane per 100,000 inhabitants. Next slide, please. Public transit, we actually have the winner of Montreal, which has been consistently winning. The main new thing to identify is that there's a 66% decrease of public usage. So when it won last year in 2020, Montreal was at 298 trips per inhabitant. We fell to 98 trips in 2021. That's obviously due to the big effect was the pandemic with travel restriction, as well as recommendations to work from home. And so we'll see in the next years if people are going back to public transit. There's also been municipalities that are advocating to have resources pulled to public transit. We have oil prices right now that are rising, which could be an incentive for people to use public transit more, but that's all to look more in per municipality, depends where, depends how. So looking at the local level more closely at the data would be very interesting. Next slide. We now have shared vehicle. We had seen a decrease in shared vehicle last year in the 2020 standings. We've actually seen an increase this year with Vancouver increasing to 382 vehicles per 100,000 population compared to 328.6 last year. Same for Nelson, same for Montreal. So again, with the oil prices being so high and big shifts of that, maybe shared vehicle is going to be a trend that will again pick up from this year on. Next slide, please. In terms of landfill waste, we wanted it to be part of the takeaway because of the pandemic, we've been spending a lot more time at home, and that means producing more waste at home. We've seen and heard about it last year. There's been some articles and research being done. It's something that we have identified in the NCL with approximately a 10 kilogram increase per household. So our data measures the amount of waste per household per municipality. So it's something to keep in mind, because even though we do spend more time at home, in order to have better sustainability, we need to decrease the waste production, and that can be done in a lot of different ways, including increasing diversion rates in both composting and recycling. And Burnaby, our winning city with 302 kilograms, actually had 60% diversion rate. So interesting to look at the data. And I see in the chat someone mentioning all the takeouts, and that's definitely one of the contributor to the increase in that indicator this year. Next slide, please. I'll finish. Actually, no, I won't finish. I have air quality and then I have urban greenness after. So air quality, as I mentioned, we had a couple of winners this year because we have counted the days without smog. So the days without a score of more than 4 on the AQI, which is the air quality index. So we have Brandon, Charlottetown, Ottawa, Prince Albert, Whitehorse, and Yellowknife. And that's an interesting indicator that we have historic data on, which is interesting to compare year on year in your municipality. And especially from the Canadian Urban Environmental Health Research Consortium, we found in our research that it said 86% of Canadians live in areas where airborne fine particle matter levels exceed the WHO guidelines, guidelines that have also actually been updated last year. So it's something to keep in mind to advocate, especially in areas with wildfires, and that air quality is big time affected there. And the last one, and I hope everybody is keeping up with me talking quite fast. We are covering a lot of ground today. I'll finish with urban greenness, with the winner being St. John. It's not a surprise that it's a smaller municipality that they tend to have better urban greenness in them. We actually used data from a report that came from Statistics Canada to have data on the municipalities in the NCL. And the data, interestingly, showed with certainty that 3/4 of large and medium-sized cities were less green in 2019 than they had been 20 years earlier. It's not a surprise, but Statistics Canada also has seen that larger municipalities are losing residents this year, cities like Montreal, much more than we used to. Again, a big effect from the pandemic. And what that does is that those populations are migrating to peripheral, maybe medium-sized cities, and that can be a big driver for urban sprawl. And urban sprawl is one of the factors that decreases urban greenness in municipality. So once again, this is data at the national level, but it's always important to look in your own region, in your own municipality, or how that translates and what kind of policies can be done. And we'll hear more about this later with Ron, actually. So I will not say more. And actually now at the time, with the next slide, we will hear from Matt and Ron, because now that we presented very briefly, I know I was going maybe a little fast, all of the highlights that we have identified, but now our meeting today, we're launching, where do we go from here? The NCL is a source of valuable knowledge. It's also a tool for building connection and relationships. And I think there's no one better than the people that were actually involved and are doing the work on the ground. So we're gonna let those people share with us their journey. And I am beyond excited to have Ron and Matthew with us today. So we will start with Matthew, who will talk about Montreal. And Matt, if you're ready, you can turn on your camera as well as your mic and take it away from here.
Merci, Margot. Hello, everyone. I am joining you from Jodage, Montreal, and really honored and happy to be with you all today. How do we use what all this data that's been collected to affect local change is the topic of my presentation today. I've been involved in the NCL process for quite some time and really happy to be here with you today. So I am among the regional organizers, next slide, regional organizers in across the country. So my role, like all of us, is to support your efforts in participating in the National Climate League and in affecting local change. So coaching you and providing resources and answering questions and plugging you into other people who might have help to offer you. So I'm not only involved at that level as a regional organizer for Western Quebec, but also as the co-founder of the Montreal Climate Coalition. Next slide. So the Montreal Coalition, we've been at it now for 7 years. We're holding our 7th anniversary this year. And the idea is to bring together a diversity of viewpoints and come to some common policy recommendations for City Hall to support and help politicians make decisions. If they can be sure that there's a big parade behind them when they're ready to implement something, they'll be much less friedler, much less hesitant to do so. So that's really important. Next slide, please. And so what I'd recommend that you all do, use the NCL data to put together some common recommendations for your city, and then draw in those diverse voices to support those recommendations. These are the 4 recommendations that we came to in Montreal, and we are now in the process of implementing almost all of them. The climate test is still a little bit, remains to be seen, but really it's a recipe that has worked and that I would really encourage you all to consider pursuing. Data-driven recommendations supported by a diversity of actors. Next slide. The NCL helps benchmark our progress in Montreal and across the country. So fact versus spin is what I've titled this slide, because often we can hear, the best news from our politicians, but until we dig into the numbers and find out exactly, whether or not they're spinning things or if they're giving us the whole truth and nothing but the truth, it can really be helpful to have the NCL back up our claims when we're attending City Hall meetings, when we're participating in public consultations, when we're interacting with our elected officials online, social media, etc. So we tend to think of ourselves as really great in Montreal. Lately, anyways, we and across Quebec, in fact. Anyways, I'll get into that a few slides later, in fact. But these are our emissions inventories, and most people don't have the time to go digging into them. So that's what the NCL is good for, is to help bring all that data into one place in order to be able to digest it and compare it across cities. All right, next slide. So 2 of the ways that we participate or use the NCL to leverage policy changes to inform policy recommendations are by 1, attending these question periods at municipal council meetings. And there are, in fact, 4 opportunities each month for Montrealers to pose a question to our elected officials, to our mayor, in fact. So have a look in your municipality. And what's really important isn't necessarily that you have all of the expertise when you go into these meetings and you pose a question. Having the NCL increases your credibility significantly, being able to cite data, being able to compare your municipality with another. Really important to be able to do that. It's the most important thing is you showing up there with different voices and different perspectives and delivering a similar message, essentially the message that we need to move faster on climate. And then it'll be up to the elected officials to discuss how best to go about doing that. But that's one of the ways that we use the NCL in Montreal, attending these City Hall meetings. Next slide. So there are dozens of public consultations each year in Montreal, and they are a wonderful opportunity to use the NCL data and graphics. Either one, you can use the data and graphics that have been published in the standings, and I would recommend looking through not only this year's standings, but past year's standings. You could draw from any of those data and visual sources in order to inform your recommendations at these public consultations. And in my experience, presenting to commissioners of such consultations is they are very interested in what can we learn from other cities, who is doing it right, and what are the best practices that maybe can influence and inform the work done locally. Next slide. A third way that NCL data is very useful is inserting it into op-eds that can be printed. And media tend to be much more open to printing op-eds that are grounded in research and comparative research across cities. So please take the time to draft an op-ed and say, hey, our city could be doing this, that, and the other thing better. Congratulations, we've led the pack in these other indicators. Anyways, this is a wonderful way to use the NCL to get the solutions out in the public sphere and debated. Next. This is to my previous point about the Montreal inventories. This helps us identify in a quick glance which cities in Canada are actually reducing emissions. Who do we need to pay attention to? Who can we learn from? So as we can see here, certain cities have a very green reputation, such as Vancouver, but the numbers don't bear that out. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, they're essentially flat for almost a decade now. Whereas another city, which maybe doesn't get as much green credit, Toronto, has been reducing, as you can see there, the orange line, pretty consistently its emissions for, again, the past 10 years or so. And then you have the comparative analysis, not only within each individual city, how they're doing over time, but also between cities. Certainly Vancouver in that case is the lowest emissions per capita or close to it at the moment. And you have other kind of cities way up at the top there. I think that's Edmonton, which is one of the highest. Next slide. The NCL stat tracker, it goes beyond what you can see in the standings. So what's in the standings is a tip of the iceberg. There's a whole bunch of data behind that you can take and reformulate and reshape and revisualize in order to tell the story that you need to tell locally about how your municipality is compared to your neighbors. And that'll be more relevant perhaps for your municipal council when you take it to public consultations or council meetings than comparing your municipality to Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal. They're going to tell you, oh, that's not relevant. So what you can do is take the data from the back end, from the National Climate League Stat Tracker, and use that to visualize and to deliver comparisons that are more locally relevant. Next slide. And this is what we've done. I've done this really quickly with the data in the stat tracker. We can see that in transportation emissions trends. Who can we learn from? Who can we? Who should we be paying attention to? So Quebec City is going in the wrong direction. Their emissions rising significantly over the time that data exists and that they've been tracking their transportation emissions. Cities like Saskatoon and Toronto have something to show us, so we can look to their policy making and ask for advice. And often the NCL will hold webinars specifically on transportation solutions. And so have a look at the past webinars in the HubFlix section to find out what can be learned from leading cities. Second to last slide, please. The NCL also inspires additional data collection. One of the things that I love to do is look online for various data sources. And so here's an example of fact versus spin. Is Montreal really pushing hard to make this transition happen? Because we've set ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets. But the question is, are we putting our money where our mouth is? Are we following our words with actions? And one data point among many, granted, is that only 3 tweets from the city of Montreal have included either the word climat or écologique since the beginning of 2020. So for the last 2.5 years almost now, that's all we've heard. And the year previously, to give you some idea, prior to the pandemic, of course, there were only 9 tweets in the entirety of the 2019 year. So you can take this into city hall meetings and you can say, listen, if we're serious about making this transition, we need to be putting the news out there on a regular basis. We need to be talking about it. We need to be selling this and getting people excited about it. So that's an example of some quick data collection that you can hopefully do as well. And lastly, please have a look, last slide, sorry. Please have a look at hubflix.climatehub.ca, the HubFlix section. Just advance the slide, final slide. Yep. Really recommend having a look in there. There's some really inspirational stories about how some solutions are being implemented, including Dawson College, the largest college in Quebec, going carbon neutral since 2018. So there's lots of those webinars, some of them NCL directly related and some of them just solutions that you can take a look at. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful afternoon and enjoy using the NCL in your municipality.
Thank you so much, Matt. I think it's always wonderful to hear your example. You've definitely been a key actor of the NCL for a couple of years and kind of puts things into perspective and always so inspiring. So thanks a lot. And without further ado, I will invite Ron McKee, who is joining us today, and he will be sharing about Oakville's story, which I'm sure a lot of you are eager to listen to. Ron, please take it away.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me and for that introduction. This is a screenshot of our hub's website cover page. Next slide. Oakville lies on the shore of Lake Ontario, halfway between the Big Smoke and Steeltown. We are called a town, but have a population of about 200,000. And we're part of Halton Region, which provides some of our municipal services. Next slide. I'll tell you briefly how the Oakville Hub was able to get the town to sign up for the National Climate League. About this time last year, I sent an email to my local town councillor, Dave Gibbons, who became hero #1 in this story. Based on discussions with Matthew Chapman, our previous speaker, and suggestions I found in the Climate League Toolkit, I asked Councillor Gibbons to get the town to participate in the project, describing it as a group of municipalities sharing meaningful indicators about progress on climate change. I told him these indicators were taken right out of the Partners for Climate Protection program developed by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I reminded him that the Federation is very important to them for guidance and finance, and that the town had declared a climate emergency and was part of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate Action. But I added that the hub team was very sympathetic toward municipal staff who are already overworked. We were prepared to do all the legwork, but we're hoping for someone to guide us through the maze of bureaucracy and data sources. To my delight, Dave immediately asked the town's chief administrative officer to provide direction, and she passed his request on to their manager of climate action. Next slide. I will now introduce to you the second hero of our story, Donna Hales, seen here in the lower right-hand corner. She is in the town's climate action department. She was wonderfully enthused by the Climate League project and very knowledgeable and very helpful. Jaya in the upper left corner, Sarah, and I comprised the hub data team. And we all danced the COVID Zoom tango about once a month for about 6 months until the job was done. Next slide. We asked the town, for an informal commitment to see the project through. And we simply exchanged emails by which the hub promised to get fair and accurate data from reliable sources. And the town agreed that Donna could meet with us monthly, but understandably with their limited resources, we would have to collect the data ourselves. And if they were satisfied with our efforts, they would review and submit our final report. Next slide. This is just an illegible screenshot of a workbook page. That's it. That's good. This is a page we posted on our Google Drive, not only for data entry, but for comments, questions, and editing. Although Airtable was an option, we preferred to use Excel. The 3 hub members were responsible for about 10 indicators each, to find and review the sources, enter the data, and post all the supporting documents and links. Donna at the town had a lot of info right at her fingertips. For others, she very kindly introduced us to the right people. We were amazed by the widespread enthusiasm. There are a lot of climate-focused people out there who love to have others ask them about their work and their findings. And we thankfully finished all tasks on time. Next slide. And now I'll tell you a little story about a spin-off benefit from being a Hub and Climate League member. The Ontario provincial government has been blatantly ignoring the climate crisis by essentially mandating the development of farmland throughout the Greater Toronto Area, particularly for big highways and sprawling residential areas. Halton Region, for example, felt compelled to create a long-term land use plan that would eat up over 5,000 acres of farmland rather than intensify the use of existing urban areas. This expansion, of course, would just create increased dependency on the automobile and discourage the development of sustainable communities. A climate action group called Stop Sprawl Halton launched a feverish opposition campaign. Next slide. And 2 months ago, Oakville's Planning Council had been requested to approve of the Halton Region Plan. Now, here am I on the top, one of many climate advocates that night who were demanding that the council reject the plan and tell the region to stand up to the provincial bullies. I was so nervous I failed to adjust my Zoom camera and all they could see were my eyes and forehead. But I told them that the town had agreed to join the National Climate League following a program endorsed by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and that they would soon find out exactly how Oakville compares to other Canadian communities on issues such as livability, which entails a lack of sprawl and dependency on the automobile. I asked them to do the right thing and reject the plan, as it was flawed and would not help mitigate the climate emergency. Next slide. And as you can see here, they did reject the plan that night. And thanks to delegations in other communities as well, the plan was later rejected by the entire region, and a no sprawl alternative plan is presently being prepared. We don't yet know how the province will react to all this, but an election is on the horizon, so we hope Doug Ford's mind might be elsewhere. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ron. And I see in the chat that we have a couple of people that are impressed about your work. Thank you so much for sharing it today. I think it's very important to have example and specific local action, and those fall exactly within those brackets. So we're delighted to have you with us today. Now, we have talked about the National Climate League. Hopefully the 55% of you who were new to the National Climate League understand it a little bit better. So we are at 15 minutes before the end of this webinar. We'll just finish off with some new exciting elements that are coming up with the NCL in the next few months. So next slide, please. Just wanted with you to share that on our website, we're working to have the NCL Dashboard, which is a new feature to see the data. So Matt has mentioned the stat tracker, which is for people that are that know Excel. It's kind of like an Excel online database that basically is a repository of all the data that volunteers have gathered since 2018. It also has data that dates from back to 2018 if volunteers have gathered data for previous years. So there's that database, and then there's the standings where we do the visualization that I shared with you today on urban greenness, on bike lanes, etc. The dashboard is a a way of bridging those two. And it's going to be an interactive map, such as the one that you see on the screen. So you're going to have a few options, including on that table at the bottom right, to see the different indicators. So if we just go to the next slide, and we'll show you what you see when you click on that icon here. You'll have the ability to add columns, and that will display the data for you the year. So for example, if I want to see all the data on air quality and compare year by year, and I think that was one of the questions that was asked in the Q&A, has there been a difference between air quality because of the wildfires? That kind of dashboard will allow you to see what the data says about this, for example. Another functionality with this dashboard would be on the next slide, please. It would be on how to filter by location. So we can filter by province or territory, as well as municipality. So I am today joining from Montreal, Chotake. So I look at this data and I have ability to look at all of it that in the different indicators, just see Montreal and compare the different years. In the next slide, we have another ability. So filter by category could be the cohort size. That would be the municipality sizes. So if you're more interested into smaller municipalities and communities, for example, you can look at specifically those. Reporting year, it depends on what year of data you're interested in. We're looking at, especially in the future, after 2021, for example, comparing public transit, because comparing, as we've seen, there's been a huge dip in public transit this year. Comparing it to 2018 data might not be so relevant. Then winners only would only display the municipalities that won awards, and awards will allow you to look up which municipalities has won, for example, in air quality regarding the previous years. So that's just a sneak peek. That's all. We'll have it fine-tuned and add on our website very soon. Next slide, please. Once again, I just wanted to give last words to some people that are involved with us at the Climate Reality Project and with the NCL, because this is a project that I can't emphasize it enough, depends on all the people that we gather in our community and work on it. So Janet Menica from Southeast Ontario has shared that engaging citizens with their municipal councillors in this annual data collection is an opportunity for a real-time analysis of climate lands used in decision-making. Harvesting the gains in this relationship can go a long way to building the trust needed to increase the scope of climate lands within major municipal decisions. Then in the second one, we have Normand from the Winnipeg Hub that has shared that through the pandemic, though the pandemic still remains our primary challenge right now, we cannot neglect climate change and social injustice. Everything is interconnected. Citizen involvement in the NCL is crucial for transparency and access to data in our municipality, which supports change in the right direction. And we have Steve Bentley from Alberta, who has shared that since COP26, increasingly the role of climate concerned citizens worldwide is to hold governments to their promises while pushing for more and better policies that will actually get us where we need to be. So asking municipalities for real climate data tells elected officials that we're keeping an eye on what matters and reminds them of our expectation to them. So thank you so much. We have actually reached the end of that webinar right now, but we will be addressing questions, and Matt and Ron, you're more than welcome, to stay with us. I will suggest though that we stop the Facebook recording and the Facebook Live, and as well as the recording in case the question period kind of goes over our imparted time.